The more information they can have, the better. I mean, at some point, they're going to have discussions with Rodgers at the end of the season about whether he wants to stay or go. And obviously, he's got some leverage in the contract that they redid, although I think most people realize, unlike Brady, it's not just an absolute clear he can just walk out the door if he wants to, although that may be the effective outcome of the way they changed the language.
All right, welcome in. It's the Hurry Up. Week 8 is in the books. We're looking forward to Week 9. The trade deadline's in the books. We've got a ton of news to break down this week. And to do that, we're bringing in one of the best, one of my favorites. And he's back off the injured list this week. It's former Eagles and Browns executive Joe Banner. Welcome back in, Joe. Okay, well, our first topic for this week, we're going to look at the Aaron Rodgers situation in Green Bay. And Joe, really kind of what I want to get to with on you on this is just kind of like what it could mean for the team dynamic. For those who don't know, Aaron Rodgers tested positive for COVID-19. It came out, literally minutes later that he was unvaccinated. That was unbeknownst to the public. People in the building did know, coaches, players were able to keep that secret over the last 3 weeks. But last 3 months, him being unvaccinated did, of course, raise different circumstances here for the team. He'll be out for a minimum of 10 days. He'll miss Sunday's game against the Chiefs. And so, Joe, I want to ask you kind of like what you think this means for the broader dynamic of the team, and kind of because the guys in the locker room, the guys in the coaching staff knew about this, does this make this a non-issue for them and that they can just sort of handle it like they would any other COVID problem? Or do you think there's something bigger at work here?
No, I think I'm going with I think they can work around this and solve it. It's hard to know how the tensions before all this happened kicked into the way this happened. But, to me, the real consequence is he misses a game that could impact the bye that they're fighting for, has a chance of missing a second game just because he's only got kind of a one-day window there to make sure he plays. They still won't have practice normally. But, this is a deeply entrenched roster. Most of it's been together a long time. As you said, they kind of knew this was going on. It's just kind of, he got caught, so to speak. So there's now going to be some implications. But as far as what their one-loss record is going to be at the end of the year, how deep they're going to go in the playoffs, unless they lose these games he's not in and it affects the bye question, I don't think it changes, where they finish the season. I still think they're one of the teams that has a good chance to win the Super Bowl as maybe 4 or 5 others out there.
Well, Joe, how important do you think it is to get a look at Jordan Love now, too? Because this is obviously something that they've been, I think, hamstrung a little bit by because they dealt with COVID his rookie year. That meant like a whole lot less practice reps. Obviously, they lost the preseason games. And then during the season, you don't see much of your backups. So now they have a full off season of having seen Jordan Love. They have, a full preseason of having seen him in game situations. Like, how important an information gathering opportunity do you think this is for the Packers and maybe for the other 31 teams too on who Jordan Love is?
Yeah, the answer is significant. I don't think it changes anything that happens in the offseason. Hopefully it doesn't cost them a game that affects the bye that they're fighting for at the end of the season. But the more information they can have, the better. At some point, they're going to have discussions with Rodgers at the end of the season about whether he wants to stay or go. And obviously, he's got some leverage in the contract that they redid, although I think most people realize, unlike Brady, it's not just an absolute clear he can just walk out the door if he wants to, although that may be the effective outcome of the way they changed the language. But any piece that helps them know what they have with Love, if they come off of a game or two that he plays even more enthused than they were about his abilities, then maybe the extent to which they go to keep Rodgers is a little less in the offseason. Whereas if he comes out and leaves them kind of nervous about whether he can really be the guy, maybe they're even more aggressive. But don't think it has much impact on the remainder of the season, but could impact the offseason decisions that they have to make because, as I say, there is a decision here, unlike the Brady situation where he was free if he wanted to be free. It was really that simple. This is just a little more nuanced.
Yeah, and I want to get into the big picture part of this, in a minute too. But in the smaller picture, there's a possibility he could be available for that Seattle game. The problem is that he would be eligible. The first time he'd be eligible would be that Saturday. So if he was going to play against Seattle in week 10, we'd be talking about potentially him going into that game without having had a single day of practice. Do you think in some way maybe how Jordan Love plays could wind up affecting that decision? Maybe you look at it and say, if Jordan Love plays well, maybe we're better off just leaving Jordan Love in there for a week versus, if it doesn't look the way they want it to look, it's like, okay, like we're going to bend over backwards to try to get Aaron Rodgers in the lineup against Seattle.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that that's the case. I mean, they're going to want to get Aaron back as quickly as he can, but he won't have practiced the whole week. And, that's going to matter. Now, an unpracticed Aaron Rodgers is probably still better than a practiced Jordan Love. So, at that point, that's really the call. It becomes very binary. We got these two guys ready to play. One didn't practice, one did. How do we think that affects the decision? But clearly, they want him to play well for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's their future. It does provide an opportunity to make a choice the next week. It leaves them feeling more secure if something did happen with Aaron. I mean, we can't forget, even though these older quarterbacks are staying healthy, they are older quarterbacks, so they're at greater risk. So a big advantage in my mind for them to get a full game, maybe even two, to see what they have with Love here.
Okay, our second topic is with a team that you're awfully familiar with and had actually done a really good job over the last 21 months of staying out of the news since Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski got there. The Odell Beckham situation, I mean, to some degree came out of nowhere. On Tuesday, just ahead of the trade deadline, you had LeBron James tweeting free OBJ. You had Odell's dad tweeting examples of Odell being open down the field and Baker Mayfield missing him. That, of course, led on Wednesday to Odell Beckham effectively being told to stay home. My understanding is Kevin Stefanski, in addressing his team, basically got the message across to the players, be prepared to go the rest of the season without Odell Beckham. If you're Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, how are you handling this right now this week? And where do you think that this goes from here?
Yeah, so what's interesting here is, and you referenced it in the question, this is a franchise that has really, really struggled to get the players on the same page, everybody pulling in the same direction, and the word's overused, but creating a culture that really people want to be part of gives you the best chance to win. They've put in so much work over the last couple of years to actually be climbing the ladder there, and I think they've done a really good job and have moved up quite a bit in how we rate them in those areas. So I actually give them credit. The Browns, not knowing exactly what led to this moment, maybe I'd feel differently, but when you invest as much as they did and appreciate the importance of having a great culture, having everybody in the locker room with a smile on their face, feeling good about things, and you're willing to actually not put up, even with a highly talented player, with things that could deviate or chip away at that, that's really hard to do. You got a coach who's literally, feels like his career is on the line every single week. So to get all those people to come together and say, listen, we're going to prioritize the positive energy we have here and the great feeling you have in the locker room over talent is something you rarely see. And I give them credit because, there are plenty of times teams should do this, but they don't out of fear of what's going to happen this week. And if there's enough disruption here that, Odell's dad is getting involved in the discussions and now it's a public event, I think they should stick with position they've established, which is we're going to put the culture and the team leadership and the joy people have of coming and playing here ahead of a player.
Was this sort of where you guys were with T.O. in 06? Like where it was, I mean, you and Andy and other people in the organization maybe, come into the determination, like it's more important that we kind of keep this team where it is and like kind of keep the good feelings that we've had in this organization. I guess it would have been 05, not 06, right? But that we sort of maintain the culture that we've built here rather than just trying to make it work with a single player.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that was a big part of the decision, but don't forget, unlike this case, T.O. is making a demand for a new contract, 1 year into a 7-year deal. And we had no denial about how big a difference he'd made in our 2004 season. But we also felt that he was amongst the highest paid wide receivers in the league at that point. And we just felt the precedent consequences of taking a guy 1 year into a 7-year deal. So at least as far as we know, this isn't some kind of a contract dispute issue. There's something else going on behind the scenes, and it may be as simple as what we're seeing. He just feels like the quarterback and him aren't on the same page. He wants to be someplace where he can get the ball and make a difference. But there's definitely some overlaps. And your reference to the importance of culture absolutely played a role in how we handled T.O.
How do you balance that? Like, because there's no there's no math equation for that. You know what I mean? Like balancing what culture over here versus talent over here, and how do we match one up versus the other? And I think at least I feel like part of the problem for a lot of teams is the better the player it is, the more he's going to be able to influence other guys and maybe take other guys the wrong way, right? Like, so, like, from your experience, like, if you're the Browns and you're sitting down and you're looking at this and saying, like, there's a very talented player, a guy who's been an all pro, but he's causing this issue in the locker room, or he potentially could cause an issue in the locker room. Like, how do you weigh one versus the other? Because it would seem like you've at least, like, to get enough good players in your locker room, like, you have to do some bending there, right?
Yeah. You know, when we first got in the league, Jeff Lurie and I called out to the 49ers, who had at that point had a decade where they dominated the NFL, and asked if we could kind of sit down and pick their brains about what they did that made them so successful. I bring that up because one of the main things they said was just what you just said. We feel like we can afford to have one or two guys on the roster that may not have the perfect character that we're looking for, and then trust the rest of the organization, the rest of the team, and our leadership to manage that situation so we can actually have the risk that we see in signing this player, but primarily get the benefit of the talent. And we live by that rule. And I think it's a good rule. I'd encourage everybody. And I think that's what Cleveland's doing. They've put together a really good team, mostly high character players. They've developed a good culture. So the question, the way we would answer it, or the way I would answer it if I was in that seat, is the disruption large enough, or is our team leadership weak enough that this could actually become contagious in the locker room and affect what we've built here? If the answer to that's yes for me, regardless of the talent level, you got to move on.
Our last topic for this week is involving one of these teams that's not scared, and that's the Los Angeles Rams. And Joe, I want to first look at the Rams side of the Von Miller trade. We'll get to the Broncos in a second, because I think it's fascinating the way that they've built their team. And, you know, one thing that was sort of raised to me earlier in the week is a lot of people look at them as being, I guess, kind of wild and all over the place. But over the last couple of years, you know, it was raised to me that they've really sort of focused what they do with these sorts of trades. And, you know, I know the general manager there, Leslie, one of his, you know, big kind of like tent pole philosophies is like get guys in the building who can score points and get guys in the building who can stop other people from scoring points. And you see the focus they've had on the receiver position, the pass rusher spots, and then the corner spot and the quarterback spot. And they reinvested in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. And they went out and they traded for Dante Fowler. That didn't work out. They signed Leonard Floyd. Then they pay him. They pay Aaron Donald. They go out and get Von Miller now. They trade for Jalen Ramsey. And of course, there's the big move to go get the quarterback in Matthew Stafford. So I guess just from like a big picture standpoint, how do you look at the way that the Rams have built the team? And do you think that this is as risky approach as I think that we've all sort of framed it to be?
Yeah, so I love watching this as somebody that was part of helping figure out the best way to build teams, because unanimously in the NFL, everybody's built their team as if it's just a fact that this is a team sport and you can't just have a few superstars like they do in basketball and compete seriously to be a championship team. And everybody I know who's been involved in building teams, including really successful people, functioned on that assumption. The Rams are basically saying the opposite. We think we can get whatever it is, 6, 8, 10 true difference makers, really high quality, best of the best in the Ramses and the other players that you mentioned. And then we can surround them with players that we hope will at least be solid, but not necessarily anywhere near their level. Like there's a big gap on their team from the best to the middle. Most teams, that gap is more like this. And then they have more depth of the people in the middle. So in my mind, they've completely upended the thinking of how to build a team in the NFL to a totally different approach than I've seen anybody use. And I think we'd have to say so far it's working. I mean, they have to actually win a Super Bowl to kind of close the deal on it worked. But I find it fascinating. And, you know, we were talking earlier about how hard it is to be the first team to do something so different. I mean, I'm impressed and kind of anxious to see if they can actually prove that this way of building a team is just as viable as the old fashioned, you know, draft, resign, mix in a couple of free agents, fill a couple of holes, and then go out and play. I mean, most people would be afraid that their special teams, for example, would be terrible because they don't have a lot of depth through the roster. But that's not what's happening. So I think it's really interesting. I give them a lot of credit for trying something so new. And I actually think that so far it looks like it's being successful. So, you know, they're taking the risks that everybody saw, that nobody until then thought the risks were worth the reward. I think that they're showing that if you do it right and you actually get the evaluations right, especially on the veteran players that you're making these huge commitments to, that you can, this is an alternative way to build a team that gives you a reasonable chance to win a Super Bowl. I think they've already proven that, in my opinion.
And obviously the flip side of this, Joe, is Denver now has capital where they can go acquire a big name quarterback like a Wilson or a Watson or a Rodgers in the offseason. And they can even tell that quarterback now, we've got capital to add players on top of you. So I think it's a good spot for Denver to be in as well. He is former Browns and Eagles executive Joe Banner. Joe, hope you feel better first and foremost, and always appreciate having you out.
My pleasure. Great being with you.